Dr. Taniguchi, thank you so much for your time and for being with us in our office of our broadcaster. So let's start from the very general question. How can you describe the current state of Georgia and Japanese relations for today?
It is, in short, one of the most promising relationships that Japan has had for the recent past. We have more to go, but given the struggle that Georgia is under to achieve even more heights in developing your own political institutions, it's very much encouraging for Japan as well to see that in the middle of Caucasus you've got a shining democracy.
What is the place of Georgia in Japanese foreign policy? I mean, what is the Caucasus region? This is your trip in the Caucasus region, so...
Right, you cannot separate Georgia solely from the rest of Caucasus. Seen from the Japanese perspective, we tend to look at Caucasus as a region. But this region is among the most interesting and fascinating for policy planners, but also for ordinary folks in Japan. Because if you go to capital cities of these three Caucasus countries of Armenia, Georgia, Azerbaijan, you have distinctly different cultures, tastes, and even civilizations. And I think it's among the places where you can have a whole host of varieties of culture, traditions, and so on. That's fascinating. And for a political planner's viewpoint, Caucasus is really at the heart of geography of the Eurasian continent. If you would like to have a continental view from the Japanese perspective, Caucasus must be the partner region, and Georgia must be a partner nation for Japan. And that's as much as what I have had, and I have reinforced my impressions.
Dr. Taniguchi, what are the ideas you would like to share with us? I mean, during this visit, I know that you have a presentation very soon after our interview. So what the main ideas you would like to share with us?
First and foremost, both Georgia and Japan, and both Georgian people and the Japanese people have to know about each other much, much more. And the more you know what's going on in Japan, the more will you be convinced that it will bear value for you to work with Japan, because Japan could offer many things. By the way, the Japanese involvement has made the East-West highway connection possible, and I think the Japanese involvement could be effective in many respects. But the first thing is that we've got to know each other much better.
And for this reason, I would like to move us to the particular issues of Japanese foreign policy.
Yes.
First of all, there is no real progress in Japanese-Russian relations so far. And President Putin is seeking for the next term of his presidency.
Yes.
Do you think it is possible to have any kind of even little progress during his last term, at least according to the acting constitution of Russia, I mean, the last term?
Right. It is almost like looking at a glass with a water, whether it's half empty or half full. You can easily be very much pessimistic about Russo-Japan relationship. After all, since the end of the Second World War, both nations have had no peace treaty over the last 70 plus years. It's unusual. But you can be also optimistic for two reasons. Number one, Shinzo Abe and Vladimir Putin have met more times than between any leaders in the world. And at any meeting, they have had something called tete-a-tete, closed-door conversations, only with Russian, Japanese, Japanese, Russian interpreters sitting next to each one of these leaders. And so the intimacy built gradually between these two leaders is undoubted. It's there. And second of all, both Shinzo Abe and Vladimir Putin are strongly backed by the Japanese and Russian constituencies respectively. So you're looking at two strong people. In a different way, you know, the Japanese is a full-fledged democracy, and he's been tested a number of times by general elections over the last 5+ years. But nonetheless, these are powerful individuals, and they're, I think, telling each other, Shinzo Abe to Vladimir Putin, Putin to Shinzo Abe, that now is the time for us to fix this problem. And so I am hoping very much that something tangible is going to be made possible between these two individuals.
Just to explain the Georgian viewers, what is the Japanese position on the northern territories?
Right. First of all, it happened after Japan surrendered. Japan surrendered on the 15th of August, 1945. And after that, the Russian force invaded into those areas and captured and grabbed the territory. So it was a clear breach of the international law. But Soviet Russia, as you know better than I do, paid absolutely no interest to the international rules and norms. And fast forward to 2018, there's a growing interest among the Russians to engage the Japanese for their development in the scarcely populated area of the Russian Siberian part. Without technologies, know-hows, and financial means that Japan could provide to the Russians, it would be more difficult and less easy for the Russians to develop their own land. So it's not just about 4 islands up north in Japan, up north to Hokkaido, Japan. It's also about how jointly Japan and Russia could develop the vast stretch of the Siberian Russia, and also about the security, because Japan is surrounded by North Korea, and Chinese are pushing their envelope almost daily. And so it's important for us to have as secure a relationship as possible with with Russia. And after all, I think Shinzo Abe and Vladimir Putin are both feeling responsible for the future generations, because if they can't do it now, it's going to be square one, and 70 years from now, our children's and grandchildren's generations may still be viewing this relationship as a stalemate. It's going to be very much outrageous.
Another really important issue of Japanese security is the situation on the Korean Peninsula. A few days ago, there was a meeting in Pyongyang between the representatives of both North and South.
Right.
And there are some expressions of goodwill of any kind of progress in these relations. Do you believe in this possibility, at least conflict transformation somehow?
Mm-hmm. First of all, I'll do something like this, fingers crossed, and let's see what South Korea could do with North. And I am looking at a huge amount of deja vu, if you like. A number of times, North Korea has cheated the international community, and South Koreans and the Japanese and the Americans have been cheated by North Korea. Worse still, South Korean taxpayers and the Japanese taxpayers paid a handsome amount of money to North Koreans to little avail, because North Korea had no interest in fulfilling its pledge of abolishing nuclear bomb program. So the same mantra, if you like, still applies. You must abolish your nuclear program in a verifiable way and in an irreversible way. And those two ways must be verified and validated by the international community, perhaps involving International Atomic Energy Agency. And so we've got a long way to go. Next month, it's been talked about that two leaders from the South and the North will be meeting in April, and let's see what will come out of that. And short of this pledge of abolishing nuclear bomb, we couldn't really say that much progress has been made. North Koreans are interested in freezing the situation and getting rid of the American forces. And I think it's going to be a net detriment to the South Koreans and to the Japanese and to the rest of the East Asian countries. So South Koreans have known this for many years, and I think I hope that South Korean president is equally well versed in this situation and going to tackle this mounting challenge.
What is the real force for real progress, and where is the Japanese place in this conflict?
Shinzo Abe gave an address to the United Nations General Assembly September last year, and he used a strong tone in reminding the international community of what North Korea said and did not do. We have short memories about what happened in the past. And so very few, actually, leaders in the world no longer remember vividly what happened in the 1990s and in the early 2000s when something called six-party dialogue was underway. And so Shinzo Abe, by using that opportunity, reminded President Trump and other people in the international community about what happened in the past. Now is the time for us to increase and heighten pressure as against North Korea. That's what Shinzo Abe insisted upon, and President Trump is saying the same thing. And there are a variety of means to heighten the pressures against North Korea, which actually are being tested.
Dr. Taniguchi, what do you think of PTT without US?
It's called the Trans-Pacific Partnership, and it's been very much hugely disappointing for us to see that the very designer of the proposal, i.e. the United States, under a different president, had to withdraw the United States from the framework. But there has been an interesting development since that time, because President Trump is voicing rather more positive tone of languages about TPP. So we're still hoping that the United States could come back into the framework. The rest of the TPP, Trans-Pacific Partnership member countries, have already agreed upon the framework agreement about the TPP, and soon there is going to be a major meeting to give a final brush to the TPP, and after that it'll be ratified one by the member countries' parliament.
What is the Japanese position on increasing role of China in global economy? And what is your competitive strategy inside Asia? Because not only China is growing, also India is growing. And so the competition inside Asia is growing.
Right. Well, it was in the middle of the 1960s when the Japanese gross domestic product outnumbered that of Germany. I was a small child at the time, elementary school kid, and I still remember that it came to us as a awesome development for the Japanese. Since that time until very much recently, well, that was a source of pride for the Japanese, that the Japanese economy is number two, second only to the United States. Well, it's still the case if you look at liberal, freedom-loving, capitalist economies. Japan is second only to the United States, but the sheer size of China is way too big for any single nation to try to be its competitor. There's no use for you to become a competitor to China. You have to take advantage of the growth of Chinese consumer market, the growth of their technologies. But here is an important line. Theft of intellectual properties. Many Japanese companies have been victims of those attempts, perhaps from China. And when it comes to their geostrategic expansions, especially in the oceans, that is extremely dangerous and worrisome, not only for Japan, but also for some of those Southeast Asian nations, and of course for the United States. So we're telling the Chinese that you must value some of those fully deep-rooted, internationally accepted rules and norms. So it's almost like a multi-layered structure. On bottom line, the security situation is getting tiresome, and you need to cooperate with other like-minded nations. On the second tier, you have problems of intellectual property theft and so on. Once again, WTO and other international organizations must play a role or two for that. And on top of those, the Chinese are ambitious in expanding their economic interests to all directions. And some of those attempts must be mutually beneficial to many people, including the Japanese. So that's the complex picture. You cannot say that this is a relationship that is white or black. It's not so much simplistic.
Dr. Taniguchi, I would like to ask you a question about the internal policy of Japan. As some Western media covers, there is a kind of rise of so-called far rights or ultra-nationalist movements inside Japan. Is that so? Because we are observing this kind of trend in the Western countries. I would like to understand, is that the common trend for the contemporary democracies, or it is just unique for the Western countries? Mm-hmm. And what could be the solution for that?
Right. If anything happens very much quickly and dramatically to affect the society in a fundamental way, it's an invitation of unstable environment. And I think that's something that's happened recently to some of those Western nations. France, Germany, Italy, UK have struggled very much with this phenomenon, and that applies also perhaps to the United States. It's been coupled with the discrepancies widening between the rich and the poor, and that's eroded the core of the society, i.e. the middle class. So you must be very much careful not to invite rapid, extreme sort of changes in such a short space of time, and one must be careful about not to damage your middle class so fast. And I think under Shinzo Abe, the Japanese people, when polled, are now saying 73 or 74% of them say that they are more or less content in what they have about their standard of living. And this poll has been taken consecutively since many, many decades ago, and this is all-time high. So 74% of the Japanese are saying that they're basically happy about what they are, which means that the Japanese middle class is intact, which is the most important thing in order for you not to have extreme hate speeches, extreme hate crimes. And very much fortunately, as a result, yes, hate speech is there as a phenomenon, but it's under control. Hate crimes there have been very negligible number of those. Japanese society is more or less on a solid ground, and economy matters very much about this. Under the current economic policy, which is named Abenomics, after Prime Minister Abe's name, is trying very much harder to give a sense of hope to the younger generation. If you get rid of the sense of hope, sense of self-esteem from the young 20-something and 30-something, again, that's the best invitation for you to have unstable society. And I think the Japanese government has to continue to guide the society to achieve more in terms of economy. That's always important.
So in that regard, what could be the lesson for us, for Georgians, that we can learn from the Japanese development, especially after the World War II? I mean, it succeeded too much in economics, in technologies and so on. What can we do? What can we learn?
Right. Japan was blessed in two ways. One, Japan is resource poor, but it had plenty amount of coal. And that was a founding sort of foundation of economic development. But the country ran out of coal early in the 1960s. It coincided with the shift of energy from coal to petrol. And Japan was happy because the sea-based connections that brought natural gas and petrol from the Arabic countries, Saudi Arabia and so on, or Australia to Japan were under firm control of the United States, which just happened to be Japan's alliance partner. These were physical foundations, if you like. And there was another layer that was about the moral sort of foundation. And that's the second part that I'm calling what was blessing for the Japanese. That was the inheritance of human capital. The Japanese cities were flattened by napalm bombs that the US dropped on Japan's soil, but human capital persisted. You couldn't kill human capital. And so for Japan's economic development, the first and the second and third important thing was human power, and human power. And I fully believe that Georgia, and by extension, a lot of people in this part of the world are hard-working bunch of people, and their work ethics are very much there, powerful. And I think Georgian government is going to have to take a second look at how best they should utilize this well of knowledge and well of human capital. But it'll take time. Nothing can be achievable in such a short space of time. It's a generational task. You couldn't achieve in one single generation. It's like a relay of torch.
Do you think that we have a right start right now, as you have any information about Georgia?
Already you've come pretty long way over the last 20, 30 years since the end of the Cold War. I know, and a lot of us know, that you've got still difficulties in many respects. Territorial integrity may be one, but you have developed your human talent. You have tried very much hard to, again, take advantage, for instance, of the rise of China, or you are you're bringing yourself closer to Europeans. And I think the fact that you just sit right at the center of this vast continent must work to your benefit. And I think in 20, 30 years' time, well, frankly speaking, this sky is the only limit for the Georgians.
So finally, Dr. Taniguchi, before I can thank you. As an advisor to Mr. Prime Minister Shinzo Abe, what could be your advice to our Prime Minister and to the people who are making policy and decisions in Georgia, what they should be focused on constructing their policy towards Japan?
Right. I was granted, most fortunately, a long conversation, opportunity of speaking with your Prime Minister yesterday. And we had a long conversation with each other. And I gathered and I detected the depth of knowledge, thoughts in your Prime Minister. I think he is a deep thinker, and his perspective is both geographic and historical. So I think people in Georgia have been fortunate to have such politicians. And one thing that, if I may, I should tell not only to your Prime Minister but to other leaders in Georgia is perhaps that we must always think about the future generations. We must always think about how best we could provide more and more opportunities to the future generations, i.e. our children or grandchildren's generations. And leaders of any country, including Japan or any other countries, must not be affected and influenced day in and day out by the fluctuations of the public opinions. It's important for any leaders to be supported by the public, but you could all easily fall into the traps of making yourselves populist, and I think it's not a wise thing to do, looking around what's going on in the world.
Dr. Taniguchi, thank you so much for your time.
You're welcome. Thank you very much for having me.